The following is a tape of a conversation I had with Mary Crimmins in January '88. Mary was blind, living in little government housing, had been blind for quite a number of years, living in this government housing. With the assistance of some bookkeeping, she was able to some family member was helping her with her bookkeeping and some things like that. But she was able to live alone in this little place, and her whole attitude was a tremendous inspiration to me to see this woman blind and living with this handicap, and yet speaking with so much animation and happiness. And going to be 100 her next birthday, which I was talking to her in January, and that'd be November. But she didn't make it. She died, I believe, in March 1988. Be 100 on the 25th of November, 1988.
I was born in 1888, and 1988 I'll be 100.
Yeah.
And we had 3 nuns. They were at the Mother House in Concordia, but for 2 years they lived in the parish house down here.
I see.
And they just went around and visited everybody, yeah. Catholics and non-Catholics. And they said there's a nun living out there in Concordia now. She said she's 102. And she said she goes down wherever their sleeping rooms is upstairs. So she goes down to the dining room by herself every day, helping some of them that can't get along very good. And she's 102.
Yeah. You remember when the church was built in Kimeo? Our parents hauled rock for that, didn't they?
Oh, yes. And all that rock was quarried on your dad's farm.
Was it?
Uncle Mike Crimmins. Uncle Mike.
Yeah.
Mike Crimmins, your dad, wasn't he?
There in the Clay County farm?
Yes, that's all that rock was quarried down on that farm. Every bit of it. And every man in the parish had to take 2 days off to haul rock. They drove right past our house farm going up to the church with their rock. Church was cornerstone was laid in 1906.
It was. 1906.
1906.
I was 5 years old then.
And it was Father Michael Brown was the priest.
Yeah. Well, then they got stone.
And all that was quarried down there on that farm.
They got stone masons to come in.
And they said that church didn't cost so much because all the work was, of course, the contractor was about the only one that pay him. Yeah. And then of course, he had all that rock had to be chiseled off and everything to use it.
Yeah.
And that they talked about doing away with the church, but they said, but you never can move it. They can't move it. You can't move a rock church. And finally, one time, said 2 years ago, they said they got the story out that it was going to be used for some kind of a museum or something. You just have store things down there in that church. And of course, you know, they had a great big priest house there, a big 2-story house.
Yes.
I don't know how many rooms in it. Somebody bought that and moved it down there to Clay Center.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Well, they've spent some money recently on the church in Kimeo, fixing it up.
Well, that's what I mean, down there at Church Kimeo.
Yeah.
That's when all that rock was quarried for that.
No, but they're repairing it. At least recently, they spent some money getting a new roof and all that.
Oh, yes, it had a lot of repair.
Yes.
And then they asked, they wrote letters to everybody that belonged down there.
Including me.
Yes, well, you and everybody else. Well, I didn't get any letter. But, of course, Tommy and Laura lived in Clay Center, and Tommy made quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
So they donated $1,500 for the repair. But everybody donated.
Yes.
And Velda Kleinbush said, oh, I got my letter too. And she said, I set my money back down. They wrote to everybody that ever went to church there. And first they was going to borrow some money from the Sliner from the bishop. But somebody said they got it all paid. I don't know whether they did or not.
Yeah, I think they did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the bishop is a friend of mine.
Oh, yeah. I remember. I think you told me about when you went to see the bishop about getting married. You remember? I said, you said you were driving a milk truck, I think.
Yeah.
And you said you went to the bishop's house, and said the housekeeper's down maybe getting the breakfast, and she said he didn't come down yet. She said she hollered upstairs and somebody down wants to see you. And he said, what do you want? And you hollered up and said, I want to get married. Well, you can't marry me, I'm a priest, he said. He said, you can't marry me, I'm a priest. That's what he said to you.
No, I don't remember that, Mary.
And I think that was Father Keys. Father Keys.
Oh, but I might have been talking about somebody else. It wasn't me. I didn't.
Maybe somebody else.
Must have been somebody else, you know.
But anyway,
yeah.
But I remember, of course, for quite a while when I lived in Kansas City, I was in St. James Parish.
Yes.
And at that time, St. James was about one of the biggest churches in Kansas City. Of course,
Yeah.
there's a lot bigger ones there now. And Father Keys was the pastor.
Yeah.
And about in the fall, at that time, in the fall of the year, there's one Sunday they always called the Orphan Sunday.
Yeah.
And all the collections were taken up to give to orphans.
Yeah.
And Father Keys, that was after he took care of his parish, his next work was taking care of orphans.
Yeah.
And at St. James, they had 3 masses every Sunday forenoon,
Yeah.
every Sunday morning. And on the Orphan Sunday, Father Keys, he said his first mass, that he preached a sermon at the other 3 masses.
Yeah.
And after he preached the sermon, he told this little story. And of course, the story was fiction. And he said now he said it was Sunday for the orphans. And he said that the committeemen come up to get their baskets, take up the orphans. And he said one man in the parish, he said he was well blessed with worldly goods. And he put his hand in his pocket to get something for the orphans. And he said all the change he had was a nickel. But he said he didn't know whether to put in his nickel or to not see the box went by. Well, he said the nickel won. He said the man put in his nickel. And then when he went home, after Mass, he went home. And he said he had his lunch, and then he'd go call on one of his neighbors. He said he had quite a long ways to go. And so he'd walk because he needed the exercise. He said he always said he had a couple of big cars, but he walked. He said when he started walking, it began to get cloudy. And the farther he went, the worse the cloud got. By the time he got to his neighbor's place, it looked so bad he thought he'd turn around and go right back home again. He had got very back. On the little ways home when it started to rain. He said, rain kept coming down a little harder. He said then he looked around he said he had a kind of wooded place there. He'd go across and that'd make a shortcut. And he could get to this wooded place. Well, he said, began to look around for shelter. He saw this great big large tree. And down near the bottom it had a slit down on the side and it was hollow inside, big enough for a man to slip in there. And he said this man slipped inside. He said, oh, it just poured down for several hours. And about evening it began to clear up. And he tried to get out and go home. But with all that rain, the bark on the tree had swollen, and the hole was too small for him to get out. And he couldn't get out. He said he was squeezed in there so tight he couldn't even lift his arms to help himself. And he thought to himself, well, when I don't come home, my folks will get out to look for me. And he said, but they never look inside of a tree. He said, well, I'll just die in here, and they'll never know what happened to me. And when he thought of dying, he began to wonder if he was ready to go. And then he thought about he said, well, I went to church this morning, and then he remembered about that nickel that he gave to the orphans. He said it made him feel so small, he slipped out and went right on home.
Well, we'll quit on that one.
and then Father Keys told that story at every Mass, and after he got through finished it, telling his story, and the ushers came up to take up the collection. Well, at St. James, they had four men.
Yeah.
One on each outside and 2 in the middle.
Yeah.
And when they got to the front and got their boxes, said they only got about a third of the way down, and their boxes were running over.
Yeah.
Another man would come with a great big release for them to empty them. He said they had to empty their boxes 3 times before they got back to the back of the church. And as we were all filing out, I was there for that last. We're going out. A man in the vestibule says, "Father Keyes knew when the right time to tell that story, didn't he?" and St. James at that church on that day, they collected between $4,000 and $5,000 for the orphans.
That was a lot.
That's Sunday morning. Filled up, so just seat right straight across, and then she sat on the top of the chair, it's called, by the east window in the kitchen.
Oh, I saw her. I can recall her sitting there and saying the rosary for years.
And they brought her out there. They helped her out from the bedroom.
Yeah.
And she sat there all day, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Helped her back in at night.
Yes. Yeah.
And they never took her in. She never went any place or anything.
No.
And one time, and your father, Uncle Mike, and they're in the house north. They had a dinner or something like that. And my dad and your dad, the 4 men, carried the chair with Grandma in it over to your father's for dinner.
Oh, they did.
The 4 of them carried the chair with my grandma in it.
Yeah.
She lived in that chair, and I never saw her any place. I never saw her out of that chair.
Well, in our family, my father and your father, and then the next one was which one?
The next one was Uncle John Crimmins.
John that lived in Concordia.
He was a railroad man.
They had 12 children in there. What was it? How many?
When he first got, of course, he was a conductor on the railroad.
Yeah.
When they first lived in Burr Oak, Kansas, and Margaret was the oldest.
Yeah.
And then Mary.
Yes.
And Mary got, I think, it was diabetes or something. She died when she was 16 years old.
Well.
And she died. And then they had Florence.
Yes.
And Florence lost her mind before she died.
Yeah.
And then Catherine was next. And then Agnes. Catherine and Agnes both went to California. And they got married out there.
Yes.
And then Constance.
Constance
lived in Concordia.
Yeah, she's dead now.
Yes, she's gone.
Yeah.
And Constance took care of all the business for a while. Yeah. And then they had John. Let's see. John was next to Constance.
Yeah.
And he kind of, when he got out of school, he wasn't out of school, I guess, yet. He kind of liked to run around. Of course, Uncle John was gone then.
Yeah.
The way Uncle John died, the church had some kind of doings.
Yeah, he was dancing a step dance.
And they asked him he said he was also good doing a step dance. They asked him to get up, and he was doing that step dance, and he just dropped dead on the floor.
Yeah. Well, then there was Uncle Morris's family would be the next one.
And then Uncle Morris was the next one.
He married
He married Laura Hoover.
Yeah.
Louis Hoover's sister.
Yeah.
And Jim Hoover would be the...
Yeah.
His father and Aunt Laura were brother and sister.
Yeah.
And they had 7 children.
Yeah.
Margaret was the oldest. And then Mike.
Yeah.
And then Johnny. You and Johnny are the same age.
Yeah.
86. Of course, Johnny's gone now.
Yeah, I know. He died recently.
Just about 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah.
You and Johnny and Mike, Constance Crimmins, and Kate MacArthur. Well, then Uncle Morris was the next one.
Yeah.
And they had the 5 children. No, 7. And now Mike and Florence are the only 2 left.
Yeah.
There's Margaret and Mike and Johnny then. And the next was Francis. Francis, we had kind of lung trouble or something. And he went to California. And he was a janitor in a motel or something.
Yeah.
And he lived out there for several years.
Yeah.
And hardly ever got back. And he died out there in California.
Yeah.
And they brought the body back for burial. And then the next one was Adrian.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And
he died recently.
Yeah, about a year ago.
Yeah.
And Adrian got married in Clay Center first. His wife's name was Grace.
Yeah.
And I don't know what her family name was.
Yeah.
They lived in Clay Center. And they had 1 daughter. And Adrian worked someplace. And somebody he worked with had no baby. And Adrian said he congratulated this man about having no baby. And the man says, I ought to congratulate you about something too. And Adrian says, what? He said, your new son-in-law. And Adrian said, I didn't know I had a son-in-law. Adrian's daughter went and got married, and they didn't know anything about it. And when Adrian went home and of course the daughter was still there at home, and the son was living with his folks. They hadn't started living together yet.
Yeah.
But they got married out of town, out of Clay Center, some little town. And that's where this man that Adrian worked with sold the license. And said, Grace went all to pieces, the mother. She tore the phone off the wall. She got to the phone right and called her husband to come get her.
Yeah.
Out of it. And Grace just went all to pieces. She tore the phone off the wall and everything.
Yeah.
And Adrian said, no use in carrying like that. We've got to get the best of it. That's all we can do now, make the best of it.
Yeah.
Well, Grace finally got over it, and they just had the one child.
Yeah. But in your family, then, were you the oldest?
Well, Johnny was the oldest.
Oh, yeah. He was he worked in a laundry, didn't he?
In Denver for a long time.
Yeah.
And then Lizzie was next. Lizzie married Earhart Barsh in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, yeah, Earhart Barsh. Yeah, there's a priest in Kansas City knows the Barshes quite well.
Well,
is Lizzie still living?
Well, Lizzie's husband was Earhart Barsh.
Yeah.
He had a son named Ollie Barsh.
Yeah.
And Ollie's son was a priest.
Oh, yeah.
Ollie just had 2 children.
But is your sister still living?
What?
Is your Mrs. Barsh still living?
Oh, no, they're all... No, she died in 1975.
I see.
It's been gone 12 years.
Well, is any of the family still living up there?
Yes. They only had 2 children,
Yeah.
Cletus and Marie. Now, they both lived in St. Joe. They both were married and had families.
Yeah.
And Marie's name is Marie Mead, Old Mead. And for about 3 or 4 years, lately, they went to Texas for the winter.
Yeah.
They went about October, November, and they stayed till February. A year ago, they moved to Texas.
Well, they did.
And they're living in Texas now.
Yeah.
And their children live there all around St. Joe. They're all married. They have 4 children. And Cletus now, he lives in St. Joe.
Yeah.
He worked for the post office, delivering mail, a city mail carrier. And he retired. He had to retire when he was 60.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got a job working for driving a school bus. When they found out he was retired from the post office, he had to give up the schoolhouse job. And now I just got the letter from his wife. They had 8 children, and one of them got killed in a highway car accident when she was 16.
Now, this is the Barshes.
Barshett, and that's
Yeah.
Cletus, that's Lizzie's son.
Yeah.
Just had Marie and Cletus. Now, Cletus he's at home now. He was out, he has trouble, lung trouble, and he was operated on, just maybe about 4 months ago.
Yeah.
Now he's at home, and he's just pretty bad off.
But your family was you and Elizabeth, and then
And then me.
John,
and then
John, Elizabeth, and then you.
And then I was the 3rd one.
Yeah.
And then Flo was the next one.
Yeah.
Flo
Married the Pew.
Over the Pew.
Yeah.
And
Then.
and then the next one was Katie.
Yeah, Catherine.
Mary McVeigh, and they just had the one.
McVeigh.
James McVeigh.
Yeah.
And then the next one was Tommy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tommy, if Tommy was living now, Tommy had been dead. He died a year ago.
Yeah.
You see, Tommy would be 82 now. He died. He was 81 when he died.
Well, then.
And then the next one after Tommy was Leo.
Yeah.
Leo was married to Cedar Swartz in Hanover.
Yeah.
And they had 4 children. And their children are all married now.
Yeah.
Well, the youngest was engaged to be married. He didn't marry yet. He was going to be. And the next one after Leo was Bernard.
Oh, yeah.
And Bernard was married to Rachel Mullen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Bernard had 6 children.
Yeah. Yeah.
The youngest one was killed in a highway car accident when he was
Wow.
17 years old. And the other one was Don, just died of cancer just 3 months ago.
Well, his Bernard,
And that's
of course,
Bernard.
died
And
several
then-
years ago, didn't he?
Right?
Bernard died several years ago. Well,
Yes.
your brother, Bernard.
Yes. Rachel died. His brother. He's married to Rachel Mullen.
Yeah,
Rachel died in 1948,
I see.
and then Loy was the youngest.
Yeah,
And Loy died in 1979 on the 8th of August, and Bernard died 10 days later on the 18th of August.
well,
And of course, Bernard lived up in East Illinois.
yeah,
Bernard got trouble with his back. The vertebrae were kind of
yeah.
just falling away, they said.
Mhm.
Bernard was bedridden for 3 years before he died.
Well, but you don't really know. As I understand it, our grandfather, when they come out to Atchison, they had your father and my father. Did they have all the family then when they got to Atchison?
No, I don't think they had any.
They didn't.
No, they got married after they moved out here.
My father, are the grandfathers? No.
Oh, no, the grandfather. No, the grandfather. No.
How many children did they have when they got to Atchison?
Well, I don't know that.
You don't know.
No, they were probably married when they moved out here.
They were married. Weren't they married in Boston, Massachusetts?
Well, I suppose so.
Yeah.
I think they were.
But the
And
children.
then they had a brother Henry that never moved out here.
Yeah, and of course brother Pat that lives a mile east.
And then,
But as far,
and I don't know whether, and both my mother and Uncle, we all call Uncle Patrick.
yeah.
And
But was
her name was Mary, and my mother's
Yeah.
name was Mary.
but was my father and your father and Uncle John and Uncle Boris
Morris.
all born in that sod house out there?
Yes, I think they were. And then they had another daughter. I don't know if you know about the other daughter or not.
Yeah, the daughter was burned.
Burned.
Yeah, but
And-
you think the children were all born out there on the farm?
All of them were born
They
there.
were- they were.
All of them were born there on that
Yeah.
farm.
Yeah,
And no,
and that was long that they moved. They got that homestead, that land, and
they homesteaded the land when they first moved out.
that was about 18.
Kansas was open for homesteading.
Yeah, 18.
And I don't know.
Around
My folks were
1870.
married in 1884.
Yeah, but I think the grandparents moved into the
Oh, they moved. And I think they moved into
about 1850 or something like that.
but they had a log. First, I think they had a kind of dugout.
Yeah, yeah, they had a sod
they-
house.
And then they built the house.
Yeah,
And now my mother's family, they lived in a log house down on the Coon Creek
oh
for
yeah,
years.
yeah.
And they're always afraid the
But
Indians
I
would
wasn't
come.
aware that your parents and your father and my father were born there on that.
Yes, they were born there. And
But
they
they got to Atchison some way, and they bought a yoke of oxen in Atchison, as I remember.
and drove out here and homesteaded
Drove
that
about
land.
40 miles.
And when
Well, then the records, of course, they didn't have vital statistics. They didn't have any records then.
no, he
The
didn't.
records, there would be no
And-
records of their birth, probably, would there?
And they didn't. It took about 6 months to even write a letter back and forth.
Yeah.
We didn't have any no word free delivery or anything like that at all.
No.
Never heard of it.
Well,
And
you'd
said
have to
after they moved out here, they never heard much about their folks back there in Boston.
No.
Now they had their brother Henry that never moved out here.
Yeah.
Now there's of course, Bernard was a railroad man up there in Illinois, and there's his oldest son. He had a son named Ronald, and there's a Ronald Crimmins lived there. And so Bernard called him up once and asked him where his people came from. He said maybe we were related. Well, they tried to trace it back, and they didn't think they were, but his name was Ronald Crimmins.
Well, do you think that our grandfather and our grandmother was married in Ireland, or were they married in Boston?
Well, I imagine maybe I think they were probably married, but now when Flo taught the Chapman School the last year she taught,
Yeah.
and she stayed, with Grandma.
Yes, I know she did.
And Grandma told her what her name was before she married, something like, and I never could remember it. But Grandma used to talk to Flo quite a bit about
Yeah. She talked to me too, but I didn't make any notes of it.
and I couldn't remember anything she said. Of course, I boarded there
But
too.
evidently they came from Ireland and landed in this Lexington, Massachusetts.
And that's pretty close to Boston.
And I just wonder, were they married there?
And I don't know whether they're married where their parents lived. in Ireland or not before they.
Yeah. Well, they must have come across on a sailing vessel, I guess.
I think they did, and they said it took them quite a while to get across too.
About 3 weeks, wasn't it?
It did a long time, I know, on the ship.
Yeah. But that's quite a venture to buy that yoke of oxen off and
drive it out here.
Drive out.
And Uncle Morris, years later, Uncle Morris and Aunt Laura, they come out here to visit. And of course they were visiting the Hoovers. Laura knew it was the Hoovers.
Yeah.
So Laura was visiting at Louis Hoover's, and Uncle Morris came over to see Grandpa.
Yeah.
Well, Uncle Morris sat there in the kitchen, and he told me all the morning, and he says, "They expect me back for dinner," but he said, "I think I'll stay all afternoon here."
Well, we were at Ralph Wurtz.
And he told me all the things about what happened years ago. And he told that when his oldest sister and Aunt Maggie, of course, at that time, he said, we didn't have any fences or anything. He said, I was out herding the cattle.
Yeah.
That was my job. He was the youngest.
Yeah.
I wasn't old enough to work in the field, so I was out herding the cattle. And he said, when he came in that night, his mother said to him, Maggie got married this afternoon. And he said, well, how'd she get married? Wasn't any man around. I said, you married a man named Jim Har.
Yeah.
And Uncle Morris said, no, I never heard of the man before.
Yeah.
And they got married that day.
Yeah.
That's the way things were then.
Well, of course, all my family. I'm the oldest. I was born in 1901.
Yes.
And then Joe was a couple of years later than that.
We just talked about that. Kate talked about that today. Oh, how old was Ralph Wurtz?
Well, I don't know.
Well, now, Margaret Footer told me, she said she saw the obituary. Did they get it in the paper already?
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, she said she saw it. And said Ralph was 76.
Yeah.
Well, now, isn't Mamie about 79?
Well, I was thinking that I'm the oldest. Then there was Joe.
You're 86, and Joe was 84.
And then there was a Minnie.
Minnie died.
Minnie, wasn't she about a year old when
she died?
Yeah.
Well, now she'd be about 82, and then Mamie was next.
Yeah, I can remember when Minnie got pneumonia and seeing Dr. Ewing come in there with his saddle horse and saddlebags and wearing a fur coat.
He came down there on what they call the parallel.
Yeah, down the parallel. But then there was Minnie, and then the next was Mamie.
Mamie.
And then Sadie.
I think Minnie died. She would have been 82.
Yeah.
82 now, she's living.
Yeah.
And then Mamie is next. Well, I thought Mamie was about 79 or 80 now.
Yeah.
I know before I moved over here, Mamie and Ralph, they went to church in Washington. And then when they came home, they stopped. See, Joe Wurtz lived right next door to me. After the tornado, I lived in the house over there, over Lloyd DePue's house. They rented it. And that's where Lloyd and I lived after the tornado here. We lost our house in the tornado. And Joe Wurtz lived right next to us. But Mamie and Ralph came to see Joe Wurtz on the way home from church in Washington. Yeah. And Joe said, you know who lives next door? Mary and Lloyd Crimmins. And Mamie said, well, I better get over there right away. And at that time, she told me she was 71.
Yeah.
Well, I think she'd be 79 now.
Yeah.
Well, Margaret Cooter told me, said in the paper that Ralph was 76.
Yeah.
Well,
you know Ralph and Mamie's family. You know who they are. You know their children, too, don't you?
I know all their names.
Yeah. What are the oldest one is?
The oldest one, I think, is Ronald.
Ronnie, yeah.
He lives up near Moorville, so he's married. Yeah. And I think Kevin is, I don't know.
Yeah.
Kevin is the next one.
Kenny.
Kenny.
Yeah.
He goes to church down here.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you about when Kenny got married. Kenny married this girl. Her folks lived in Palmer, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, of course, she was not a Catholic.
Yeah.
But she wanted to join. She wanted to join, but her folks wouldn't hear to it right away.
Yeah.
They wanted to have this big wedding in Palmer.
Yeah.
And so they went to see the priest. The Kimeo priest all went to Lynn.
Yeah.
And they went to see the priest. And he said, well, you could just go ahead and get married in Palmer, at church in Palmer. Well, I'll be there.
Yeah.
When you're married, I'll be there. But he couldn't perform the ceremony, but he'd be there. If I'm there, they can get married out of the church.
Yeah.
Kenny. That's the way they got married.
Yes, I was at the wedding.
What?
I was at the wedding.
Oh, you remember that. And then And then she joined the church right away.
Yes.
And she said when when my folks get used to me going to church down to Kimeo, she said I'm going to join the church right after we get married.
Yes.
And she did.
She sang at the funeral this morning very beautifully.
I know. Oh yes, she had a beautiful voice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jane.
And then of course she's.
And they have 2 children, Chad and Jared.
And now they're serving mass. They still
Yeah,
serve
that's right. They
mass
serve
all
the
time.
funeral mass. Yeah.
And but anyway, and then.
Well, after
But
Kenny,
they said when they first heard, they said that the priest could be they get married, he'd still be in the church, and the minister from this church,
yeah.
I don't know if it's Lutheran or what, he came to see him. Kenny told us about it, and he said I've been looking up the back to about the church and everything.
No.
And he said, according to the laws of the church, the priest can't be there for the wedding, And Kenny said, well, then you'll have to get somebody to take my place, because I won't be there either. and so the priest left, and he said, well, you can't back out this way. He said, oh, yes, I can. He said, I won't be there. If the priest isn't there, I won't be there either. So then the minister went back. Pretty soon he called back and said, well, some fine print down at the bottom, and I read that the priest can be there.
Well, then Arlis is the next one.
So the priest was there.
Yeah, Arlis is the next child, I think, isn't he? Arlis is the next after.
And then they said when I heard about when Ralph got so bad he couldn't do the farming, that Arlis quit teaching and took over the farm work.
Yes, yeah.
But he didn't move in with them.
No.
I don't know where he lived. Does he live? He lived in Belvoir or Beloit or someplace.
Somewhere, yeah. I think
But anyway, so he does
near, I don't know.
but he takes care of the farming and all that, because Ralph wasn't able to do it.
And the other children,
And then there was just then Mamie and Sadie were the only two.
Yeah. Well, of course, I mean, Ralph's family, there's Arlis, and then there's the girls,
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And then
Jean.
Ralph's family. Oh, he had the Joyce and Jean and Diane.
Yeah.
3 boys and 3 girls.
Yeah. Well, what do you know about the Canelli family? They were the Canadian Irish. I remember there was quite a difference between the Boston Irish and the Canadian Irish.
The Canelli family and the Nashers were related in some way.
Yeah. Well, my mother's our father's name was Patrick Canelli, wasn't it?
Yes, there was
And Sarah was
the mother's name, and then they had 2 girls. Your mother, Mary, and Susan was married to Frank Hogan.
Yeah.
And there was John, Pat, and Mike.
Yeah.
John was the oldest, and then Pat. Pat was just about a year older than my brother Johnny.
Yeah.
And then Mike.
Do you remember when Susan died?
Yes. Susan and Frank Hogan were married, and they lived in a house not too far from, you know where the Hogan farm was, down there at Kimeo. Then there was a house just kind of off about a mile out in some field or something. That's where Frank and Susan first lived when they got married.
Yeah.
And Susan was 2 years older than me.
Yeah.
And when they got married, first they had Leonard.
Yeah.
And they weren't married too long. And then 2 years later they had Leo.
Yes.
And then Susan, I never knew I guess maybe it was what they called consumption.
Yeah, that's what they called it.
They called it consumption then, but now they call it
tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis, or what's the other one? Everybody gets it when they go to the hospital.
Yeah.
What is it? Everybody's having it when they go to the hospital to get it. Of the lungs. Well, I know. That's how I can forget things. But anyway, Leo was only about 3 months old, I think, and Leonard was probably 2.
Yes.
And when Susan died.
Yes.
And your mother took the 2 of them.
Yeah.
Leonard and Leo both.
Yes.
But and of course now, I think Sadie was about 4 years old.
Yeah.
But she's having an awful bad time. Of course, Leo's 3 or 4 months old.
Yeah.
And said she was having an awful time with Leo. Said he cried all the time, and she didn't know what to do, and she was up all day and night. And so Mrs. Joe Holden, you know, she was Katie Hilton before she got married. Yeah. And she said, I'll take Leo and see if I can get along with him.
Yeah.
She took him, and he lived with Joe Holden the rest of his life.
Yeah. Yes, I know it.
Of course, now he lives in an apartment down the right, but across from the church down here now. That's where they live
But
now.
as I understood the Keneally family, that would be my mother's.
And they were some relation to the Dashes.
Yeah, and
but I don't know just how
they came from Ireland into Canada.
Yeah, and then they came from Canada to.
Yeah. Do you remember where they come from in Canada?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
But I know they came. And now Tommy, of course, now my brother Tommy's wife, you know.
Yeah.
She was Jerry O'Donnell's daughter.
Yeah.
Now the O'Donnells came from Canada too.
Yes.
Well, when Jerry O'Donnell's came from Canada, you know where we lived on the farm, the Nashes, the parent, the older ones, they lived just a mile south of us on a corner in just kind of a small house. And I don't know who Mr. Nash, what the names were, but they had John and Tom and Morris and Nick, Mike, and Mrs. O'Donnell, just 2 girls, Mrs. O'Donnell, Mrs. Jerry O'Donnell, and Mrs. John McQuillan were the 2 daughters.
Yeah.
And then the boys. And Jim Nash.
Yeah.
And when Jerry O'Donnell came from Canada, came to her folks there at Nash's, they had 7 children. And they had lost 2. Said they'd lost 2 in Canada before they lost their first one they lost.
Yeah.
And then Bert had a twin, and they lost the twin. So they had 9. Kind of the 2 that died in Canada. They had 7 others. And then after that, they had, after they moved out here, they had Margaret, Agnes, and Margaret, and Sarah, and Loretta, and Henry, and Mike, Nicholas, and Martin.
Yeah.
There's 14 of them.
Well.
And Loretta died this last April. She was the last one, the 14th one that died.
Well.
They're all gone.
Well, of course, you knew the Reed family too. That was my father's sister. And of course, your father's sister too.
Yes. But see, the Reeds, when they got married, they lived right across the road from us, and then a lot of you sit down the hill.
Oh, did they?
Just right across the road from us.
Oh, they lived out.
We lived in Clay County, and they lived right across the road in Washington County.
Yeah.
And just if you measured in blocks, it'd be about 3 or 4 blocks down the hill.
Well, were they farming too?
Oh yes, they were farming, and they had. But there's 8 of them all together. Roderick, and then Mike, and then Lida. Lida's name was Elizabeth, but they called her Lida.
Yeah.
And Flo, and then Marie, and then Kate.
Yeah.
And in 1904, they had twins.
Oh, yeah.
They named them. Alphonsus was named after, we had a priest. Our priest, Kimeo, was named Alphonsus.
Yeah.
And the other one was Raphael, named after Father Michael Brown.
Yeah.
Well, when they grew up, they called themselves Alf and Ralph. The twins, Alf and Ralph. And Kate MacArthur is the only one. When Aunt Minnie got sick, she wasn't feeling well, but she didn't tell anything about something. Then Uncle Dick took, they just had one doctor here at that time, one doctor here in Greenleaf. Greenleaf wasn't much of a town then, I guess.
Yeah.
It was 1906.
Yeah.
And he brought her up to see the doctor. And the doctor said she had cancer and was too far gone to do anything.
Well, didn't they later move to
yes, well, then when they went home, that was in March, she died in June.
Well.
And the twins were 2 years old. And right after, then in September, Uncle Dick quit farming and moved to Clay Center and had a butcher shop.
Yeah.
And Roderick and Mike, see, they went to the country school, and like Roderick and Mike said, we didn't learn anything. And when the year before the mother died, they started to go to Clay Center to school, be in the 8th grade.
Yeah.
And they drove from home every day to Clay Center and went in the 8th grade, and then they took the county examination to get into high school.
Yeah.
And when the mother died in June, and in September, Roderick and Mike and myself, the three of us went to Clay Center to go to high school. We were freshmen. Roderick was 19, 18, maybe 18. Mike, I was 2 years younger than Roderick, and Mike was a year younger than me. We were all just starting in high school. And when they graduated in high school, they went to college. Mike became a dentist, and Roderick became a lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
And now they're all gone.
And then you went on to later to, well, you taught for a couple of years. Sure.
I taught for 6 years, country schools.
Yeah.
And
including me.
No, I don't think you were going, I don't think you went, well, it was 1906.
Yeah, I was there. You taught me.
And anyway, I taught 6 years. First I taught the Champlin School, that was first year.
Yeah.
And then I taught the Brown School, that was down near my grandma Morrissey's.
Yeah.
And then I taught 2 years at Bodie'ville.
Yeah.
And then I taught the old Kimeo school where I started school myself when I was 4 years old. And I taught that school for 2 years.
Yeah.
And Flo taught for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then Flo and I, we went to St. Joe and we went to business college.
Yeah.
And studied to be stenographers and typists and things.
Yeah.
And I worked for 30 years.
Taking dictation.
And
You take shorthand, didn't you?
what?
You took shorthand.
Shorthand.
Yeah.
And some of them could take on stenotype.
Yeah.
They could take it all down on a stenotype
Yes.
and then type it just like that. But we just took it in shorthand.
Yeah.
And I don't have Flo worked for, I don't know how many years Flo worked. Oh, it's 1913 when we went to business college.
Yeah.
And then Flo got married in 1919.
Yeah.
So she worked for about 5 years
Yeah.
in St. Joe. And then she got married.
Yeah.
And I worked till 1940. I came back in 1944. My mother had died.
Yeah.
And we tried having somebody just stay with my dad,
Yeah.
Live alone. And they didn't get along too good. So then I came home and never went back. I've been here since
Well,
1940.
you worked for the stenographer for Marshall Field, didn't you? And,
Marshall Field in Chicago.
Yeah.
But first I worked for, I worked in St. Joe first.
yeah.
And I worked for the Creamery Company in St. Joe. And this, a man that worked for the Creamery Company, I used to take dictation from different ones. And then I quit the Creamery Company. I worked for Alney Music Company in St. Joe, and they were setting. I think they was going bankrupt though, the music company. And the man that worked for them, then he went to Kansas City,
Yeah.
and he got a job working for Wunderlich Piano Company. So then he wrote back to me and told me if I'd come to Wunderlich's. Said he knew they were going to hire some help from Wunderlich's. Said I'd do better if I'd come down. So then I went to Kansas City,
Yeah.
and I worked for Wunderlich Piano Company. And I don't know just how long I worked for them. And then I quit. And then that's when this girl and I went to Chicago, tried it out for a short time. When I come back, I got a job working for Dixon Goodman Lumber Company. I worked for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then they finally moved all their offices and everything out of Kansas City to Tulsa, Oklahoma. I worked in Tulsa, Oklahoma for them for 2 years, and then I quit down there. And I went to, just went out to Johnny was living out in Denver then.
Yeah.
Went out for a visit in October, and I stayed till January out there, and just at Johnny's.
Yeah.
And that was the Depression. You couldn't get a job any place then.
Yeah.
When I come back, I came back, I was in Kansas City, and rear end aircraft was out at Fairfax Airport, and the girl that worked there said they were going to hire somebody to help with the bookwork and something, so she said for me to go down and apply, and I applied, and I got the job. I worked there until I quit and came home in 1944.
Yeah. Well, you were at Fields in Chicago, though, too, weren't you?
But
You were at Marshall Fields in Chicago?
yes, I worked. That's the first job I got in Chicago. I worked for Marshall Fields wholesale.
Yeah.
And that was all one of the biggest places, the biggest wholesale place in the United States then.
Well, you're gifted with a great memory.
And I can, every once in a while, I can't remember a name, just maybe a name, just a common thing that I can't remember a name. And maybe in the middle of the night I think about it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's right.
And now, Katie said today that somebody told her that maybe John, see, Flo had eight children, 4 boys and 4 girls.
Yeah.
Orva died in 1940. And he died awfully
That was
sudden.
her husband, your sister's husband.
Flo's husband.
Yeah.
Married Orva DePew. And they lived on a rented farm out there east of Greenleaf here when Orva died. And